Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome to Homeschool Together podcast. If you can take a minute, head down into the show notes, connect with us on social media, Facebook, Instagram. Check out our great resource guide that we have out. And if you could, head on over to iTunes and give us a review. We'd really love to see that. Ariel, today we have a great interview with one of the...
She was lovely. I'm going to gush. I don't know before you even say it. She was lovely. I feel like...
Can we say she's the Oprah of secular homeschooling?
I mean, I don't know that I would say that. But she's pretty amazing. And so here's some background. So today we are talking with Emily Cook from Build Your Library Curriculum. And that's the secular homeschool curriculum that we are using with our daughter. We are so excited about it. And for me, this is, I don't know, I feel like this is like the moment when we've made it. We on the podcast, we have made it.
We've pulled a heavy hitter in.
Well, and the reason is for me, when
we're in the big leagues. We're out of the minor leagues. We're in the big leagues now.
Yeah, I feel like it was legit. You know, we've always wanted to homeschool. If you've listened to our story, we've wanted to homeschool since well before we had children, and we knew that that's what we wanted for our family. But after our oldest daughter was born, she was about a year old or so. She turns 5 tomorrow. So, it's been a while, and I started kind of looking up what would we do? What would homeschooling look like now? We've known we wanted to do it, but what curriculums are out there? What might we want to do? And I found this curriculum, and I told you, oh my gosh, you got to look at this. This is amazing. Look at this. It's K through 12. It's secular. It's starting with an around the world journey, and then it starts into first grade is ancient civilizations, and it goes forward in time. And look at all these great books, and it's all literature based, and which we love to read. And I fell in love with this curriculum, and it's the first thing in homeschooling beyond just a theory of what homeschooling was going to be. It was something tangible that this is what I'm going to use with my daughter. I know it. I can't wait. And now we got to talk to her. Like, how cool is that?
Yeah, I know. No, it was actually a very informative interview, and you can really, I think the big thing that I took away from it is that she has a deep-rooted understanding of homeschooling. Obviously, she has a very popular curriculum that goes the full distance.
Right, it does. And she has a ton of homeschooling experience as a homeschool parent to 4 children.
And as we playfully called her, the veteran, she has a deep understanding of it. And I think that comes out in the interview. I really enjoy the theory side of the house. You know, everybody's read the Alfie Cohens, the Holtz, the Gattos, but it's really interesting to see somebody who has devoted, a couple decades of her life now to the homeschooling community and has given back in the form of this great curriculum that a lot of people use, that we are going to use for our kindergartner. I'm just excited to have everybody here listen to this podcast, hear Emily Cook, talk very eloquently about her homeschool story, her, the background of the curriculum, how she updates it, a lot of her thinking. It's really fun to see her thinking, because when you hear her say what she's thinking, you can see that manifest in the curriculum, and it's really nice.
And she goes into the details with how she applies Charlotte Mason in a secular way, how that influenced her decisions. And yeah, it was pulling back the curtain, and I had to stop myself from being too much of a fangirl because I love her and everything she's done. And she was lovely, and I hope that this is helpful to folks. And we were even able to crowdsource some questions.
Yeah, so we're from the community.
Yeah. One of our Facebook members, Andrea, actually asked a couple of the questions that we asked to Emily. So thank you, Andrea. We really appreciate it. And in future, when we do interview other folks. We'll try to crowdsource
More questions.
more questions and try to get answers to things that you're all wondering. So another great reason to connect with us on our Facebook group.
Yeah. And in the podcast, there's a lot of references to a lot of websites, a lot of books. We are going to have all those links in the show notes below. Try to put as many as we can.
Yeah, don't worry about writing them down.
Don't worry about writing them down. They'll be in the show notes. Look down below, just below the resource guide. You'll see it at the bottom. Go ahead and click on them. Find out. Read those books. Read the books that Emily's reading. Like a good graduate student in college. Don't read the article. Read the citations. We got to read it all. So those are all down there for you to enjoy. So let's go right into it, and with our interview with Emily Cook.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm more than a little thrilled that you're here, honestly. When we first started looking into homeschooling, when our daughter was maybe a year old or so, I found your curriculum, and I have been just so excited to get started with it. And we're just about to start. So for those folks that are listening audience that don't know you, can you give a bit of background of who you are, your homeschooling journey, and then we can jump in to build your library? Absolutely. Hi, I'm Emily Cook, and I'm the author and creator of Build Your Library Homeschool Curriculum, which is a secular Charlotte Mason inspired program. I've been a homeschooling mother for many, many years for 4 children, and they've always been homeschooled. And I've graduated 3 of them as of this past year. So 2 of them are now thriving in college. And so I think it's been 18 years that we've been homeschooling, and I'm down to just my last one, my youngest, who's 11-year-old. So wow. It's been a long time.
that is so we can refer to you as the homeschooling veteran for the most part.
That always sounds so weird to me.
So what inspired you to create the Build Your Library curriculum? You said that you've been homeschooling for a long time, but Build Your Library, I think on your website's only just a few, about 8 or 7, 8 years old. So what inspired you through your initial journey as a homeschooler to then go ahead and develop this curriculum that spans from kindergarten to 12th grade? What was that inspiration, or what was that drive?
Well, when I was first starting out, like in our early years of homeschooling, I would just spend like hours and hours of time hunting for that perfect curriculum. And I think we all do that. But we tried so many different things. And I discovered Charlotte Mason and literature-based learning pretty early on. And I knew that that's what I wanted. And that's exactly that was my drive. I wanted that curriculum. And so when I started really digging in and looking for what literature-based programs were out there, everything I was finding was just very religious. And so I was constantly having to change things and rework every program that we did. And it got to a point after several years of that I was just writing my own because nothing was working the way I wanted it to. And so I just sort of decided one day that I was doing this on my own and I didn't need to use somebody else's curriculum anymore. So at that point, I realized that it's not just me out here trying to do this. There's a hole in this market that I had figured out how to fill for my family. So why not try to see if I could help fill that gap for others as well? So Build Your Library is basically built on my experience just homeschooling my own kids in this particular style. So
well, what is it about the literature-based curriculum that kind of grabbed you as a homeschooling parent?
I have always been a bookworm. I know my mom tells stories about how when I was 3 years old, I taught myself how to read, and I would scream myself to sleep every night from birth, basically. And as soon as I learned how to read, I could go to bed quietly. So I've always been a reader. I've always loved reading, and I would get in trouble all the time in school because I was always reading something else instead of doing what I was supposed to be doing. So realizing that I could teach my children with real books. We didn't have to use textbooks. We could actually just read things that we enjoyed and learn from that was just a game changer.
So this is inspired from Charlotte Mason. Would you be able to kind of give us the elevator pitch on Charlotte Mason, what it is, who she was?
Yeah. So Charlotte Mason was a 19th century British educator. And she was quite revolutionary for her time because she believed that children were whole persons with their own minds and their own ideas, not just empty buckets to be filled with knowledge. And she spoke of education in three parts. Education is an atmosphere, a discipline, a life. And it's not just reading great books. I mean, that's a big part of what I do and what I've taken from Charlotte Mason, but it's really, there's so much more to her theory than just reading living books. It's really about educating the whole child. Like that quote, education is an atmosphere, a discipline, a life. It really sums up her idea that everything that we do is part of our child's education, from the books that we read to the way we just talk around the breakfast table, to how we choose to decorate our house, to the music we play throughout the day. It's all part of that atmosphere. And I really think that Charlotte Mason's philosophy is more of a lifestyle per se than a type of curriculum.
So it inspired kind of this, lived experience, kind of this,
Yeah.
like you're almost like you're in fish and water. It's education is all
Right,
the time.
total immersion is what I'm thinking.
Yes.
So when you began to do the Build Your Library curriculum, when you started, designing it and building it, did you start with some initial curriculum ideas, or did you just, go whole cloth, fresh and new, go right from Charlotte Mason? What was the kind of that like genesis point for you?
I had been doing a basic like 4-year cycle for history. So that was a big part of what I wanted my program to be, because I just think that makes the most sense to me, to gradually like work through history chronologically. And so that was a big component that I wanted to include. And there's just so many great books that I'd read with my kids, or that I'd wanted to read with them, that I wanted to include. So, and of course, I tailored it to use Charlotte Mason's ideas of narration and copywork and dictation and those types of things that really worked well for us in our homeschool, that I thought would be sort of a universal, like this is the way to do Charlotte Mason, and that I wanted to include in the curriculum.
Could you describe like maybe, just as an example of like what a year of Build Your Library looks like? Maybe we tend to focus on younger audiences here with early learners, with kindergartners, first, second, and third graders. That's kind of the niche of the listeners that we have. What are they expecting if they, worked on a Build Your Library curriculum for those years?
Well, then I'll talk about level 0, since that's probably the level that your audience would be the most interested in. That would be a world geography year. I've always loved geography. I've loved reading about other cultures and other places and that sort of thing. So I really wanted to include that in Build Your Library. And we actually have 2 world geography years, level 0, and then we come back to it in level 7 at a more middle grade level. But basically what you're going to get in level 0 is you're going to cover geography. And within geography, you're going to be cooking, you're going to be doing art. So you're studying the world through like hands-on ways, as well as reading lots of great picture books and things. And the science in that level is all about animals. So you're studying animals around the world. So as you're focusing on one continent, you're learning about the kinds of foods they eat, the art you might find there, how people live, the animals that live in that environment and what that environment is like. I include poetry just as an introduction to poetry. You're not meant to do anything with it. You just read it a couple times a week just to expose your children to what poetry sounds like and different kinds of poems. And there's a lot of like fun activities around it, but it's not really any like writing, or there's no narration, there's no copy work or dictation at that level, because Charlotte Mason believes you should wait until a child is at least 6 to begin that. So I don't include any of that, because level 0 is a very gentle sort of introduction to what homeschooling looks like.
So you recommend on the site that we need to add a math curriculum, and kind of wondering, as you've gone through homeschooling your children and using your own curriculum with them and now graduating them, what other supplements have you used throughout the years beyond math with Build Your Library?
Probably the ones that I would recommend that I've used in the younger years. My kids all loved Explode the Code workbooks for phonics, and I would also count that as spelling. I don't know, something about them are just fun for kids. I don't quite know why, but they work really well. We also used Handwriting Without Tears. I don't know if it's because my children are all left-handed, but that program just really worked well for them. In the middle grade years and elementary years, we've also used Jack Christ Publishing, their workbooks, Growing with Grammar, and Soaring with Spelling. Those are the ones that we've mostly used. And they are really bare bones, but they work really well. And my kids all, for some reason, love workbooks, which is weird to me, but that really just hit their need for having workbooks. I know in the older years, my twins struggled a lot with writing. And the thing that we used that I think worked the best for them is Writing with Skill by Susan Wise Bauer. It's not so much something they enjoyed using, but I think it works really well. It's a very solid program, very thorough, and it definitely got the job done. But for something more fun, I would say Mad Libs is one of our hands down favorite things that we use because it's just silly and fun. And I feel like they all got a really good grounding in basic grammar in their elementary years, just using Mad Libs. Like, I don't think we even used a formal grammar until they were all about somewhere around 10. But we did a lot of Mad Libs, and I feel like we blew through a lot of the early grammar stuff because of that.
With a lot of parents, there's multiple kids in the household, and it sounds like I think you have 4. We have a lot of our listeners who are on our Facebook page have said that they have multiple kids in the house. Do you recommend how to use your curriculum with multiple kids in the same room or in the same household? How do you guide people in doing that?
I always recommend, especially if you have a fairly close age range, to try to combine into one level, because it's a lot to try to juggle, especially if you're new to homeschooling and you don't want to be doing 2 separate levels if you don't have to. It'll reduce your workload as the homeschooling parent, and it'll kind of build this nice bond in your have like a one-room schoolhouse kind of feel when you're all studying the same things. And of course, you'd still have separate math curriculums and separate like spelling and that sort of thing. They can do that on their own level, but working together on the history or the geography, it really sets a great tone, I think, in the household because you're all doing something together.
How far apart would, maximum age range, or would you take 2 levels and kind of combine them into one big study for both kids? Our kids are 3.5 years apart. So we're kind of looking at how would we do this as they get older?
I actually think 3 to 4 year range is probably the biggest stretch I would recommend for combining, just because otherwise, if you have like a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old, that's going to be too hard to combine in one level because the 6-year-old's not going to be able to handle the material that the 12-year-old can handle, and your 12-year-old is going to think everything the 6-year-old is doing is too babyish, So I think a 3 to 4 year age gap is probably the widest. I know my kids, my older 3 were 3 years apart, and we always did everything together. And then my youngest came along and she had to do everything separate from them because it was just too big of a gap.
Oh, I see. So if you're going to do one level, would you recommend like splitting the difference between the ages? And, if you've got a 6th grader and a 3rd grader going with a 5th grade or 4th grade, level, like, do you split the difference, or do you tend on the younger side and then give harder things to the older learner that are more appropriate for his or her age?
I think this really depends on the children because I mean, some younger kids are mature enough that they can handle a higher level, and some older kids would prefer to be at a lower. So it really depends on your kids and what they're capable of, like what their comprehension is like. I know a lot of people prefer to aim lower and then add on because it's definitely easier to add more things than it is to take out things. So that could be a factor to consider.
Over the last 7 or 8 years, how has Build Your Library changed as kind of a product? Has it evolved over time? Have you found things that parents have struggled with that you've tweaked, common issues maybe? Like what type of things have changed over time for you as a creator?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I've probably evolved as I've been working through how to do this. Like when my first 2 levels I put out were levels 1 and 5, and I felt for a long time like I needed to go back. Like I knew for a couple of years now that I was going to go back and redo level 5 completely, because when I did it originally, it was as I was doing that level with my twins. Like we were in that level. And so I was sort of writing and doing at the same time. And
Okay.
it was I felt bare bones because I wasn't quite sure what Build Your Library was going to be as I was writing it. Like I had a very vague idea of what I wanted, and I was sort of in the process of figuring it out. And by the time I'd written a few more levels, like I felt like I'd honed in on what I thought it was going to become. And so I knew I needed to go back at some point and redo that level because I felt I could do better. And so that's been a big thing, is like learning about like what other people are saying about how they use it and what's worked for people, what hasn't worked for people, and how I go through the changes when I update based on like if there's a particular book that a lot of people just don't get or don't like, or everyone's skipping that book, then I'll go ahead and say, okay, I need to reevaluate that book and find something better to use there, or that sort of thing. And a big part of the levels 5 and 6 updates that I just did was diversifying, because when I started writing Build Your Library, like History of Us was basically the only thing on the market that existed for that level for American history that was secular. And so I had to work with what was on the market. And as years have gone by, new things have come out that I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I have to use this. Like when I was writing level 12, which is an American history year, I just kept finding so many great middle grade things that covered American history in such a great way. So I was like compiling this huge stack of books that I'm like, this is going to be the new level 5. It's definitely a process.
I know you're in the middle of level 0 now, and you're going to be doing level 1 soon. I'm
Yeah.
very excited about the history quest. Can you talk a little bit about the change from Story of the World to history quest, and what you see as the big improvement in the change?
Yeah. Well, like I said before, like with History of Us, Story of the World has been it for the longest time. And I know that people have issues with it, but it's like the only thing on the market that works the way I want it to. So it's sort of I've been stuck with it for a long time. And I still like Story of the World because it's a storytelling way of teaching history, which I just think is a great way to study history. So when I remember talking to Kate at Pandia Press a few years back, and she was telling me about this new product they were going to have, History Quest. And I got so excited. So I've been like, okay, but you have to pass me this. Like, I need to see it so I can work on my new level 1 when that comes out. And so I've been very excited. I've been reading through it with my youngest. We read through most of it last year, and I thought it was really great. It's a great like improvement upon Story of the World in that it still teaches in a storytelling way. And I love the history hops where it kind of goes, you go back in time and you visit someone who lived in that time period and they tell you about what their life is like. It's really cool. And so I really like the improvement on the fact that it's 100% secular. There's no like Bible stories being told as true while Greek mythology is told as a story, that sort of thing. So it's all 100% secular. And the writing is great. So I'm very excited about that.
So, and they plan to come out with future levels of that, right? I think they only have the only have the first one now, and so are
the
you?
First one's out, and I know the Middle Ages one. I forget what it's called. I think they call it Middle Times, maybe. That's coming out really soon. I'm not sure exact on when the actual release date is, but I know it's very soon. And I don't know beyond that if I'll be using any of the other history quests in Build Your Library, because I believe that they're going to be doing American history, I think, after that, which wouldn't line up as well with what I do. But definitely the first 2 books are going to be used in Build Your Library.
Okay, great. That's terrific. Can you talk about other upcoming things you might have beyond the updates for level 0 and level 1?
Yeah, I'll be doing, basically, this is like the year of the update, and it's going to continue into next year because I'm basically going through everything. And I don't know for certain, like, I know there's a lot of books that are becoming hard to find, and I don't know if it's because they're out of print or if it has to do with COVID shortages I know there's a paper shortage. So I don't know
Wow.
yet how much is going to actually change and how much will come back in to the market in a year or so. I don't know. But my goal is to try to replace anything that is just becoming impossible to find. There's a lot of books that have just disappeared from the market, which has been very stressful, but I'm hoping I can replace everything.
And you used to be able to get things used, and now the used
Yeah.
market's dried up. I was trying to find around the world art and activities for level 0, and
Oh,
it was
that book
like
is impossible. Yeah, no.
impossible. I should have bought it last year. You know, it's like, oh, I have time. I'll get it later. It's like, no, you really, you just can't find it. It doesn't exist, right, on the used market. And I know you're replacing
Yeah,
that now
it's
with
been
global
like
art.
that for it's been like that for a lot of books, like all of a sudden, all at once. And I'm not used to that. I'm used to like, oh, this book went out of print, so I'll replace it here and there throughout like the course of writing this. But like for everything to go out of print all at once has been a little bit stressful. But I'm excited when I find new things though. So
Yeah, I watched your tea chat on Facebook the other day, and here you talk about the new books that are coming for level 0, and I was very excited to dust off my credit card as if I haven't been buying enough books and get those. So can you talk with us about some of the other things? You have the levels, as we said, from kinder to 12th, but you also have unit studies and a book club,
yes.
and can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, I've been writing unit studies kind of in between when I'm working on other levels, just because I think unit studies are so much fun. And I like to have a nice variety of things. So, like, I have the Harry Potter unit studies. So, it's one unit per each book. And within those, you also do a Hogwarts course, Muggle style. So, you do like herbology, which is just a study of botany and that sort of thing. So, that's been really fun to write. I also have like holiday themed units. So I have a Thanksgiving unit. I have a Jan Brett Christmas unit and winter holidays around the world. So I've tried to come up with ideas that I see like a lack of on the market. Like I have a prehistory unit study
Oh,
that's sort of
awesome.
like a nice bridge in between level 0 and level 1. And I have a Darwin and evolution unit study because that was something that I felt like needed to exist. So I
Mhm.
wrote it. Um, and that was actually one of the very first units I think I did was the Darwin and evolution and then the Hobbit unit study, which is still to this day like my favorite unit study that I've ever done with my children. It was just so much fun. I love The Hobbit. It's one of my all-time favorite books. So that's a great unit.
Awesome.
Um, and
Mhm.
then we also have recently started the Read Aloud book club packs, which I used to do the family reading crates, which was a book for everyone in the family. And that just, it was a lot. It was a lot of work to do. And it wasn't working the way I wanted it to. So I'm like, well, how can I make this better? And I decided to pare it down and just focus on the one read aloud. So it's a read aloud for the whole family. And each month is a specific theme. Like the one for October was Thrills and Chills, and it's a fun, spooky story to read with your whole family. And all the books included in that are middle grade. And I include a discussion guide. And it also comes with recommendations for other books that are on the same theme that you can share with your whole family. And it's divided by picture books, middle grade, and then young adult and adult reading. So something for everybody on the list. And then we also have a Facebook group where you can come and chat about the books. So it's a nice little book club to talk about what you're reading.
That's awesome. So how young would you say for the book club pack, since it's meant to be for the family? It's kind of middle grade, so maybe kind of mid elementary at the youngest.
Yeah, I would say it really depends on what kind of stories your child is used to. If they're already listening to chapter books, then they're ready for it.
Oh, okay. Well, let me get
Yeah,
my
take
list
a
out
note
here.
there. Take a note.
We just finished doing a Harry Potter with our just turning 5-year-old this week,
Mm.
and I was like, oh, that unit study. I'm just gonna be. We'll just go back to it in a few years when she's a little bit older, and then we'll be able to do that with it. But we're very excited.
So a lot of the people who are listening to our podcast, we tend to call them accidental homeschoolers, or they're very
Mm.
new to homeschooling, and like all of our lives orbiting the black hole that is COVID. Um,
Yes.
you've obviously probably seen a huge surge in interest in your curriculum. Have you seen common problems or issues that keep cropping up to new homeschoolers that maybe you've seen on your message boards or issues that have been reported to you that people are struggling with. Could you talk a little bit about those issues that maybe you've heard about and maybe some solutions you could offer them?
I think the biggest one is, especially for people who are like brand new to this, is that homeschooling does not look like public school. And you have to kind of let go of some of those ideas that have been ingrained in you, like structured routines and things that you think school looks like. It doesn't look like that when you homeschool. And I think the biggest thing I would recommend is for brand new homeschoolers, especially COVID homeschoolers, to just like take a month and do nothing, decompress,
De-school.
and take that time to read as much as you can about homeschooling and what homeschooling looks like, and read blogs, read books, like do some research on homeschooling before you start jumping into anything. Because I don't know, I know for myself, like way back when I first started, I just kept buying curriculum after curriculum after curriculum because like I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for, but I knew like this wasn't working and that wasn't working. And so I think taking that month to really focus on like, what does this look like and what will it look like for my children, will go a long way to just making this whole thing easier and smoother to transition to.
So Ariel and I just put out a podcast. One of the questions we've been seeing, issues that we've had people mention is, am I doing enough? This time, the amount of time I'm putting on, and we actually did a deep dive on, what an average day of a kindergartner, first grader, and second grader looks like minute by minute, and then comparing that
in
to
public school.
Yeah, in public school, and comparing that to, say, a homeschool experience. What type of, for that parent that's asking, am I doing enough, or how much should I be doing? What is for a kindergartner, maybe as an example, what's the level of time they should be committing to the daily homeschooling routine?
I would say, and it usually shocks people, for a kindergartner, no more than like 30 to 45 minutes a day. That's it. And that's structured. I'm not talking about playtime or like nature walks and things like that, but like actual structured learning should never take more than like 30 to 45 minutes for a kindergartner. Just because they're in school for hours doesn't mean they need to be working for hours. That's a great way to like ruin school for your children, I think, is to like force them to sit down and do school for more than 2 hours at a time. That's just too much for a child that age.
So you wouldn't include read aloud time in that, I'm guessing.
No, read aloud. Right. I would say anything that the kid is already thinking is fun, like reading aloud, going for a walk, that sort of thing doesn't count in that time. I'm talking about like sitting down schoolwork. And honestly, at that age, I in my own personal experience for kindergarten, all we ever did was reading lessons. That was it. That was our only set like thing that we did. Everything else was sort of just added in as play. Even math. We never did formal math until my kids were at least 6 years old.
So you're talking about this process of, deschooling and reading up as much as you can about homeschooling. We've been buried in books ourselves. I just finished Brave Learner, which was really great, by Julie Bogart. But what other homeschooling philosophy books would you recommend to new homeschoolers to read?
I'm going to go old school and recommend The Well-Trained Mind by Susan Wise Bauer, just because I feel like that is like the one thing that has that kind of scope and depth. It's filled with recommendations. I haven't even seen the newest version yet, so I'm sure it probably has a lot more like updated recommendations for curriculum. But it's probably the one book that I've consistently returned to over the years for inspiration or motivation, or just like checking in to make sure I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So I feel like that's probably my favorite resource. For books specifically about Charlotte Mason and implementing her theory, besides obviously reading her own original writings, I would say my favorite is probably Karen Andriola's Charlotte Mason Companion. But I have to throw in the caveat that it's from a Christian perspective, and she definitely espouses the idea that old-fashioned is better than modern. So if you can look past that, I feel like, especially for me, in my own experience, I feel like it gave me a pretty good grounding of how Charlotte Mason's theories could actually work and be implemented in a homeschool setting. And not a book per se, but in my early years of homeschooling, and even today, I still go back and read up on stuff, but I loved Melissa Wiley's homeschool blog. I think it's called Here in the Bonnie Glen. And just, she was super inspirational. And I wish like I could be her sometimes. I feel like she's my ideal homeschool mom. But her high tide, low tide schooling that she wrote about was just very informative for my own homeschooling. And so I feel like I wish she'd compile all of her blog into a book, because I just think that'd be great. And then my last recommendation, it's not a homeschooling book, but I think it's invaluable. It's called Deconstructing Penguins, Parents, Kids, and the Bond of Reading by Lawrence and Nancy Goldstone. And I actually talked about this, I think, recently. I don't know if it was in my last tea with Emily, but I talked about it fairly recently. But that's a book about how to talk about books with your kids. And I think it does a really great job of showing you how to have great, like, deep conversations with your children about books. And that, as well as a literary analysis talk I listened to once, I think by Susan Wise Bauer, that really helped me learn how to talk about books with my kids. And it also really helped me to write thought-provoking discussion questions for the literature books I use in Build Your Library.
Great, thank you.
Could you talk a little bit about your book?
Oh, of course, yes. My book is all about like how Charlotte Mason works in a homeschool setting. Like, I would say my book is basically me sharing over a cup of tea, like what my homeschool has been like and how I've come to the way I use Charlotte Mason's ideas in our homeschool. And I try to, specifically because one of my favorite resources was a Charlotte Mason companion by Karen Andriola, which was very much like how to live an old-fashioned life while teaching this way. I wanted my book to counter that and be like how this works in a modern homeschool with, technology and new books and things that exist now that didn't exist when Charlotte Mason was alive. And I think that right there has been like the biggest thing for me in how I use Charlotte Mason and how I tell other people about Charlotte Mason, and that Charlotte Mason doesn't have to exist in that vacuum of we only use things that existed when she was alive to teach our children. I think if she were alive today, she would absolutely love like all of the technology that we have at our grasp, and like all the things that we can do now that didn't exist then are still worthwhile and great. Like, I think that's such an important thing to point out to people so that they don't get bored with it, because I feel like if you're only reading all those old-fashioned books, like especially for children who want to read things like Harry Potter and more modern stories, like they can't relate to that sort of thing as much. So showing that you can still have modern ideas and modern things in your homeschooling and still be following Charlotte Mason's philosophy was a big part of why I wanted to write that book.
That's great. And I know that you do have two kind of it was a little bit tongue in cheek, but I appreciated it. Kind of a homeschooling, would you Build Your Library University for parents series of blog posts. Could you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Yeah, honestly, that was just me like trying to organize everything. I get a lot of questions where I end up just sharing a link to my blog because I'm like, well, I have an article all about that. So it turned into me just going, what if I just compiled all of this and said, here, just read this. This will answer all of your questions. So yeah, it is a little tongue in cheek, but it was just me like trying to be helpful and like organize everything, because especially with the surge that we've had this year and with all these new accidental homeschoolers, as you put it, like that just makes it so much easier for them, I think, to find out what they need to know about Build Your Library and how to homeschool in this manner if everything's just in one nice, easy package.
Yeah, I really liked it. It's kind of, I'm telling Matthew because he hasn't seen it, but it's a series of courses almost, and you just kind of go in order. And I just devoured it and thought that was a great resource. We'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes for the listeners.
So you have kids in college, so maybe we'll talk a little bit about, the whole education landscape has been evolving over the last decade or so with the, for better or worse, the Common Core has come into a lot of people's lives. It drives a lot of like the metrics that we have to meet, and a lot of different states have different standards, different expectations, different testing requirements. How did you evolve with that, with both the curriculum that you produce and then also as a mom yourself, teaching your children. How did that impact you as your kids moved up through the grades and off into college? How did that influence or affect you guys?
I would say it wasn't so much an influence on me until when I started writing curriculum, and then it was like, oh, is this a thing I should think about or be concerned with? And I don't know, for what I understand about Common Core, it's mostly to do with math and like language arts, like grammar and things like that. So I haven't really worried too much about it because that's not like what I'm aiming for in writing my curriculum. I usually tell people that this is more focused on like learning how to learn and that sort of thing than like following a set of standards.
Yeah, I think the concern for maybe some of the listeners that we have is that they're afraid that they're not going to do enough for their kid for like a first grader or second grader. With COVID, they've pulled their kids
Yeah.
out. They're doing home education. I think there's this general fear, and I mean it's well formed because they're not necessarily educators themselves. They're having to do it here on the fly. That they're afraid when their kid goes back into third grade or fourth grade that they're going to be behind or something of that nature. I think that's the big fear that a lot of people
Man.
are having.
I would say to that being behind is a myth. There's no behind. And I know that there's like a set, like this is what your child should be doing at this age. But I would say that even in a given classroom, that's not going to be accurate for every child in the class anyway. Some kids are going to be ahead, some in the middle, and some are behind. And it's not something to concern yourself with unless you know you're putting your kid back in school within a year. But even then, I think as long as you are reading with your child, as long as they are reading, as long as they are doing math at their grade level, that sort of thing, you're not going to get behind. Like it's not really something to worry about. I think behind is one of those big boogeyman myths that we build up in our minds, especially as homeschoolers. Like, oh no, what if we ruin our children? But if you care about your kids' education enough that you're putting in the effort to homeschool, then you're not going to ruin them. They're not going to get behind. You're not gonna cause them to not be able to get into college or any of those things that scare us and keep us up at night. So
Good. No, thank you. You're an
yeah.
expert, and I just wanted you to say that. And I want everybody to take a deep breath and relax.
So you're talking about college, and
Yeah.
so we're curious now that you have children in college. What was that process like for them to get in? How did the colleges view them as homeschoolers and their transcripts, kind of quote unquote?
I'm gonna feel kind of like a fraud, and that my kids are in art school, so it wasn't a huge process, and that we didn't have to we didn't jump through a lot of hoops. Like they got in on their merit. As my oldest daughter is a creative writer, so she had to submit a portfolio of her writing. My other daughter's in art school for illustration, so she had to submit like, I don't remember what it was, 15 pieces. I mean, yes, they wanted our transcripts and that sort of thing, but they didn't really care about test scores and that sort of stuff. They were more focused on, oh, you've completed this kind of course load, so we know you can handle college and you're great at your art, so we accept you on that. Like, I think it would be a different story if we had to do something like MIT or a more academic college where I'd actually have to like submit work and stuff that my kids, because I remember we looked at that ages ago. Like, I don't even know why I was looking at MIT, but like they wanted, like at that time, I don't know what their standards are now, but it was something like they wanted a portfolio of all the coursework you've done and all your classes. And I was like, wow, that's intimidating. But that was also like 5 years ago. So I don't even know what it looks like now. But I know I recommend to people to, especially as they're starting out in the high school years, like just look up a few colleges that you think your child might be interested in, especially like state schools, whatever's closest to you. Look at those schools and look at what they're asking for in admissions. Like, what kind of information do they need from you as a homeschool parent? Like, when we applied to the school my kids are at now, they really just wanted a transcript and their samples of their art. So that was pretty easy, I think. So it's not nearly as scary as I thought it was going to be. I think that's also something to consider too. Like, whatever you've built up in your mind, it's probably not going to be as bad as that. The colleges that expect that kind of like crazy amounts of information are pretty few and far between. So most of the schools we looked at were fairly easy as far as what they expected you to submit.
Oh, great.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So, I think we're coming up to the end here. Is there any guiding wisdom that you'd like to, share with some listeners? You know, things they need to think about, message to go forward.
I would say my biggest thing that I've been telling people lately is just to take a deep breath. You're doing enough. Like you're not going to do everything in 1 year. Like there's so much material out there to use in your homeschool that I think it can be overwhelming. So just try to remember that you don't have to do everything all at once. Like you don't even have to do every subject every day. You can take it easy and like do it on a loop schedule, or maybe every other day we do this subject and every other day we do that one, and just try not to overdo it. I know as new homeschoolers, when I was new to homeschooling, I remember I tried to do too much. And so I think it's important to like be able to take that step back and say, what do I actually need to cover today? Don't worry so much about what you're going to cover tomorrow or the next day or that. Just focus on right now. Like, what does my child need from me today? And if that's just, we're going to snuggle on the couch and read a few books, that's enough. If that includes like, oh, we're going to do a field trip, we're going to do art projects and all of that, then that's great too. But you don't have to do all of that in one day.
That's great advice. Yeah, I think that's something that we all need to remember, even though we know and we tell our listeners the same thing. Sometimes we even find ourselves trying to do too much. So it's really
so
good to
easy
slow down. Well, and there's just so much goodness that you want to share with your child.
Yeah. Definitely.
We're bursting with information we want to and exploration we want to do with her. And I know that's the way a lot of homeschool parents feel too. But sometimes we have to rein ourselves in a little bit to keep from getting overwhelmed. So, well, thank you so much, Emily, for your time. We sincerely appreciate it, and we're very much looking forward to starting Build Your Library.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time,
Happy homeschooling!